So in this video, I'm going to go through LIWC a little bit more in detail compared to what we went through in our workshop series. And so LIWC stands for Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count. And so it essentially is a great tool to do lots of different forms of textual analysis. The most recent version of LIWC is LIWC 22, as we see here in the on the website that I have open. There are several different versions of LIWC going back through the years, but LIWC 22 is the most current version, and it seems to be the version that obviously they are supporting the most. It came out this year. A previous version was LIWC 2015. Somewhat similar, but it feels like LIWC 22 added a lot of different functionality, and so we'll go through some of that in this video. So if you want more information about LIWC, you can go to their website, www.liwc, so that's spelled LIWC.app, and you can get a lot of information about how you can configure LIWC for your own needs, and you can get more information about how you can purchase it. And so LIWC is not a free software. It is available under a couple of different licenses, specifically an academic and university license and a commercial license as well. And like a lot of software, they are now doing it over kind of in a style of a subscription service. So you can go as short as 30 days for $20 Canadian, up to 3 years for $181.95. So a couple of different options depending on how often you wanted to, how long you needed to use the LIWC software for. And there's also some further options if you wanted to buy several licenses. There are some discounts that are available at each of the different levels. And the website gives a little bit more information about what LIWC is in real general format. And so essentially, as it says here, people reveal themselves by the words they use. Using LIWC to analyze others' language can help you understand their thoughts, feelings, personality, and the way that they connect with others. It can give you insights you have never had before into people and the world around you. And it says here, this is their claim, that LIWC is the gold standard in software for analyzing word use. It can be used to study a single individual, groups, or people over time, or all of social media. So essentially, it's a textual analysis tool, and how most of its functionality works is by counting the words in your documents that you want to analyze and comparing those to dictionaries of different features. And that'll make more sense in a second when we do some analysis, but essentially LIWC revolves around a set of dictionaries, and each one of those dictionaries is connected to a certain type of textual analysis. So for example, negative emotion. So there is a dictionary of words that they believe represents negative words, or words that would be indicative of negative emotion. And it essentially goes through your documents and counts those words, all of your words, and sees how many of them are within that negative emotion dictionary for that specific feature. And it allows you to really compare different documents to one another. And so, for example, in the case of, social media analysis, I can get a better sense of, how people are talking about certain things based upon the LIWC features and the dictionaries that are contained within the software itself. So before we go into the software itself, I wanted to just take a little quick look at a couple of different features that are available on the website. The only one I really wanted to point out was this dictionaries tab. And that's helpful because once you have purchased a license for LIWC, you get access to the LIWC dictionary repository. And so there are several dictionaries that are available in LIWC when you first install it, but those dictionaries may not, for example, meet your needs. And so a lot of different academic and other users have created custom dictionaries, which you can do either manually or through the LIWC software. I won't go through that in this video, but you can essentially within the dictionary repository get access to some of these kind of custom created dictionaries. And they're often most useful for doing analysis in languages other than English. One of the big drawbacks of LIWC And a lot of textual analysis tools is that they're developed specifically for Western languages, most often English. And so you may find that if you were doing some analysis on other language, that out of the box, LIWC would not meet your needs. And that's where this dictionary repository could be handy, because as it says here in this description, I'll make it a little larger, other researchers have created LIWC dictionaries for other languages, including, as it says here, Brazilian Portuguese, Chinese, Dutch, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Norwegian, Romanian, Russian, among others. The one caveat with that is that some of these tools, because LIWC 22 is the most recent version of the software, not all of these language models have been developed specifically for LIWC 22, but you can use some of these older language models for the new version of the LIWC software. But just keep that in mind, that if you find that LIWC doesn't have the dictionary functionality that you want out of the box, the dictionary repository, once you have purchased LIWC, allows you to use some dictionaries that have been defined by other individuals. And just know it exists, and it can be a handy tool to give a little bit of more functionality for LIWC than it has out of the box. So let's take a look at LIWC. So essentially LIWC, as I mentioned, does a lot of different things, but the main functionality is this LIWC analysis tab. So all of the different things that LIWC can do are kind of listed here on the left-hand side. This is one of the main departures if you've used LIWC in previous iterations. It essentially used to do, for the most part, only what is contained within this LIWC analysis menu option, but it has added a few different pieces of functionality in this new version. We'll go through a few of them, but not all of them. But again, for most parts, the LIWC analysis is what most people do. Most people use within the LIWC. It's the part of its functionality that has been tested the most significantly. So essentially, if you want to do any form of analysis in LIWC, even in these other kind of things that it does, like everything, you have to start with some form of data. And you can do that in a couple of different formats. You can read your data from a CSV file or an Excel spreadsheet. You could read, for example, text files, or most often text files, but other things potentially from a folder on your local computer, or you can specify specific files. We will do our analysis on these examples using CSV files for the most part. So let's open up the Convoy data set that we've been using throughout most of our example videos. So we'll just double click on it. And essentially, when you import the data set, you will be presented with this sort of spreadsheet kind of view, so that you can see some of what your data will be within the when you do your actual analysis. It essentially shows you the first 100 rows of your data set, but this view is handy because it could reveal anything that might look a little bit out of whack for your data set. So for example, in previous times that I've used other versions of LIWC, I've sometimes had to reformat some of my comma separated files to remove things like new lines to make it being read into LIWC a little bit more easily. But in this example, we can see just by scanning through our different columns and different rows that it seems to be able to get all of the values without any challenges. So essentially on this screen, you're going to have to do essentially highlight the columns that contain the text that you want to analyze. And so in this case, with our tweet data set, we would, as we have before, highlight the tweet text. This is the text that LIWC is going to go through and count the various words that might occur in each one of these things. So the dictionaries, it's going to compare these tweets to the dictionary values and return values upon basing its analysis on this tweet text column. So we could run LIWC right now and do our analysis, but I want to go through some of the other options that you might want to do if you to configure your analysis a little bit before you actually run it. So a big one would be dictionary. So we're going to stick with the LIWC 22 dictionary, but there are a couple, as you can see here, other dictionaries that are built in. If you were doing analysis using the previous Luke 2015 dictionary and you want to stick with that, you can switch. And then that has several of the older ones as well. They have one built-in German language dictionary, and this is also where you could load your external dictionaries from those repositories that we saw on the Luke website. But in this case, we will stick to the current version of the Luke 22 dictionary, but you have options for previous versions, and you can add the custom dictionaries that might exist from the repository. Within this dictionary, the Luke 22 dictionary, there is a variety of different features available, and we'll go through some of these when we do our actual analysis. Not all of them, because there's quite a bit. But if you didn't necessarily want all of the features that Luke could provide for you, you can highlight some and remove some. So if you were only really specifically interested in finding out, for example, the negative and positive tone and some of the negative and positive emotion, you may not need all of these other features. So you can click on any one of them and highlight and remove ones that you did or did not want. We're going to keep them all in. But just know if you find the results that you're getting from Luke to be a little bit overwhelming, you can remove some features that you may or may not use. I don't often use the segmentation, but there are some ways to kind of split out your text if you wanted to. But in my case, with my comma separated file, it's already done. And then when you've actually done your results, you would be able to see them on this final tab here. So I think generally we're happy with how everything is set up. We have the Luke dictionaries selected. We have the categories that we want. We have selected the piece of text that we want to analyze. Now all we have to do is press this kind of orange button to run Luke. And again, depending on how many records you have, this could take more time or less time. So again, this is a subset of a larger Twitter data set that I've used. There are 1,000 rows or so of it. So it didn't take very long, but I've done data sets with hundreds of thousands of rows, and it obviously will take a little bit more time, and the time it takes will also depend on the processing power of your individual computer. So this is essentially the results here. So what it does is recreates your spreadsheet, in this case that we have imported, and it adds a whole bunch of different values related to the features that it is counting. So we can scroll through a few of them, but there is quite a bit. In this case, I only ever had one segment in my tweet, so that number is obviously 1. It gives you a couple of measures here, one measure for word count, which can be handy. It can give you a sense of whether some of these features change depending on the amount of words that are within your document text. So these are tweets, so they're all relatively short, but you can see there's a little bit of variation, 27, 48 different words. And then you have essentially a list of all these different features. It starts out with a whole, 4 different summary variables, which we will go through in a minute, which are calculated a little bit different than the other features within the document set. But otherwise, each one of these numbers that you will see here, as we go forth here, they kind of represent a percentage of the words within this document that fall within this specific feature. So for example, in these tweets, this is an example of big words. And so in each one of these individual rows represents an individual tweet. So in this specific tweet, Luke has determined that there are 25% of those words are big words. And it works the same way with all of the different features that Luke can determine for you. So for example, in this tweet, 7.14% of the words are the word we. And so all these features, I won't go through them all. There's a ton of them. So some of them are related to specific things. So like I, we, you, she, they, and such. But then some are a little bit more generic as well. So for example, this is the percentage of adverbs and things like that. And there is, for example, somewhere within here, there is personal pronouns, which is a commonly used one if you want to get a sense of how often a person is referring to themselves within a certain document. That can be a useful one. As we talked about earlier, there are dictionaries for both negative and positive tone and negative and positive emotion. So these can be handy measures to see which texts might be more negative compared to other ones. It's another type of way to essentially do sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis is done a significant amount of different ways depending on the tool. And within LIWC, it uses a dictionary approach where it has a dictionary of words that it believes indicates both positive or negative emotion or tone, and then just counts them. And then again, these numbers represent the percentage of the words within your document that match that dictionary. And again, in this case, each document is considered a single tweet. But if we would have done this over a set of text files, perhaps each one of those text files might have represented a speech, a piece of political speech, so or something. It doesn't necessarily have to be as short as tweets. It actually works a little bit better the longer the text. So you don't necessarily have to do analysis just on short text from social media. You could have a collection of books or a collection of essays, a collection of journal articles. Those could be your documents in this case. So in that case, if you had imported a list of a whole bunch of text files that represent speeches, every one of these rows would have been values for that specific speech. So I can't go through all of the different features. The LIWC documentation goes through it far more than I could in the time that I have. But just know there are quite a bit of them. And essentially it is in each one of these, except for the summary variables, in each one of these cases, LIWC is comparing your document to its dictionary for these specific features and is telling you the percentage of words within your document that match something within that dictionary. So now that we have these results in LIWC, you may want to save them in a CSV file so that you can, do some form of analysis with them. And that's relatively easy to do. You just click on this Save Results button here in the bottom right-hand corner, and then you can save them as a CSV. And you can open them again as well, but it would just repeat what we have. So it essentially will open Excel for you. And essentially what we'll have is the exact same thing that we just were looking at. We will have our original data set. And as you recall, with Twitter, in Excel, it turns long numeric numbers into scientific notation. But in your actual CSV, these numbers are still in their original format. But you can now see we have our original columns here, and then we have a big list of all of our LIWC features. And this, as you can see, is pretty overwhelming. So that's why you might want to choose some features to include and some to not include. But you can also eliminate them within LIWC itself. So again, you have a whole bunch of the different LIWC features, and you can now use this file for some form of analysis in something like Excel or maybe SPSS. So that's essentially our results. But as I said, I wanted to touch on, before we move on quickly to some of the other things that you can do with LIWC, I wanted to talk about the summary variables. And so there are a couple of different I think that there's 4 different values that LIWC considers summary variables, and there are analytic thinking, clout, authenticity, and emotional tones. And as we can see here, each of these summary measures are algorithms derived from various LIWC variables based upon some research that the creators of LIWC have done. And so it's a bit tricky because they are essentially proprietary formulas. We don't know how they are, what the combination of variables are that they're using to calculate each one of these summary variables, but they operate a little bit differently in that they're not, unlike the other LIWC features, they are not, pure percentages of words that are connected to one of these summary variables. It's kind of more like a composite index that goes from 1 to 99. As it says here, the numbers are standardized scores that have been converted to percentiles. So again, it's somewhat of a measure that allows you to compare documents to one another, but it is not a, percentage per se, in that, you would, if you see an analytic value of 10, it doesn't mean your words are in your document are 10% analytical. So I'll go through part of what it says here. And again, this is all available within the LIWC website. The analytic thinking is a variable derived, as it says here, derived from the dimension on several different categories. It essentially captures the degree to which people use words that suggest formal, logical, and hierarchical thinking patterns. And so it says here, people low in analytical thinking tend to write and think using language that is more intuitive and personal, and language scoring high in analytical thinking tends to be rewarded in academic settings and is correlated with things like grade and reasoning skills. It says here, language scoring low in analytical thinking tends to be viewed as less cold and rigid and more friendly and personal. So again, if you wanted to analyze whether people are using a lot of analytical thinking within your data set, this could be a good summary measure. So for example, when I have done work trying to measure online deliberation in social media spaces, this analytical thinking summary measure can give you some insight into how people are deliberating in those settings. So clout is another one. So clout essentially is supposed to, in their words, refers to measuring the relative social status, confidence, or leadership that people display through their writing and talking. It's clout, as they outline, is different from the concept of power. There used to be a power variable within, or is within LIWC 22. So again, if you want to get a sense linguistically whether a person uses language that might indicate clout, this summary variable could be useful. A third one is authenticity. So it essentially tries to measure whether people talk in a specific authentic way. And you could go through, and I'll share this within our coursework websites, whether a person is more authentic or not. It can be measured from that summary variable. And the final one is emotional tone. So it's a little bit different than the others in that it includes, it puts the positive tone and negative tone dimensions that you might have seen from our dictionary variables within one kind of composite dimension into a single summary variable. And as it says here, the algorithm is built so that the higher the number might be, the more positive the tone is. Numbers below 50 in this case suggest a more negative emotional tone. So again, you can get far more detail on each one of these summary measures and the science behind them on the LIWC page. For each one of them, they have corresponding publications from either the authors or people who have used them that give a little bit more detail on how the measures were created. But again, big takeaway is that they are proprietary, so we don't really know completely how the numbers are calculated, but they may be useful, and they are, I guess, a little bit of a more complex measure analyzing the linguistic text of your documents that goes beyond just counting the words that might match specific dictionaries. So going back to LIWC, I wanted to go through a couple of other features of LIWC very quickly. So again, the LIWC analysis is its most commonly used functionality, but there are a few other things that it can do, which are listed here in the left-hand side of the LIWC interface. This is the dictionary workbench. I won't go through it, but if you wanted to create your own custom workbench dictionaries, this tool will allow you to do that. Word frequencies might be a useful one. We saw some of this when we took a look at the Butter software, but essentially this word frequency measure will create a little bit of a word cloud of your document. So if we want to do that, so if we go open our CSV for our convoy data and choose the piece of text that we want to run frequency on, so again, this column for the tweet text, and then we just click on the bottom right-hand corner, it will count all your words. And then in a minute, it will generate a word cloud. And you can change some of the formatting. You could change some of the words visualized as well. So maybe you don't want as many words visualized in this. And so you can play around with that a little bit. But you can essentially see that we now have a word cloud created as part of our textual analysis. And we can see, obviously, within the Convoy, Freedom, Ottawa are very big names. You can play around with it a little bit as well, where you can try to eliminate some words. So you may, for example, not want HTTPS in there, which is probably because people are sharing a lot of links. But again, word frequencies can create a little bit of a graph for you if you wanted to visually represent your words. Similar tool is meaning extraction. So this will look very similar to what we did with butter. So if we load in our CSV again and choose the text that we want to analyze and run the meaning extraction method, and essentially here what it's trying to do, or what it says it's doing, is that it's drawing meaning from the frequency of words that occur within your different documents. You can see it's taking a little bit more time to do this one, so we'll give it a second. There it goes, quicker. And you can see it looks very similar to our frequency measures that we did with butter, but essentially it is showing us the most dominant words. So Convoy, again, this HTTPS, Freedom, Ottawa Police, Freedom Convoy, Charges Canada, and shows us the frequency of the words that are, how often that occurs within our document set. So for example, of the 1,000 or so rows that we have, Convoy is present within 731 of them, or 70% of them, and it gives you the amount of rows with that word. So again, Convoy could have occurred more than once in some of these rows. So that's kind of the broad frequency, but you can also see how it is done by row as well. So you can get a sense, with smaller text it may not be as useful, but you can get a sense of how often each one of these, for lack of a better word, meanings that they have derived occurs in each of your documents. And so particularly if they were longer documents like essays, you may see that a word occurs more frequently, and that may give you a sense of part of the meaning of what that document is. So meaning extraction is another thing that it can do. I won't go through narrative arc, but you can use LIWC to get a sense of how a story develops. So you could feed LIWC a larger document, or you could do a series of larger documents, and then you could compare the narrative arc between those different documents. Language style matching allows you not similarly, but to a certain degree allows you to compare the language styles between two different documents. So you can, or a whole bunch, you could send it a whole bunch of transcripts, and you can get a sense of the difference between speakers as well. So there's a whole bunch of kind of formatting that you have to do for that. I won't go through it all, but just know it exists, that LIWC, again, using a linguistic approach, can compare the language between either two speakers or two different files. This contextualizer is relatively interesting. So if we, let's load in a file first. So we will take our Convoy data again and open it. And we will choose a piece of text here. We'll choose an ID column. I'm not sure if we need to, but we will. And then what we're trying to essentially do in this case is the contextualizer gives you a sense of what words might be before or after a certain word. So for example, in this case, what we are going to do is we're going to analyze using a word list. You could use specific LIWC categories if you wanted to. So you could choose a category like I or we or personal pronouns, and you can see what words commonly occur before and after. But I want to do some analysis on my Convoy data using a specific specific words. And we've seen several examples of how Convoy is quite often appears within our data set. Obviously, we can add other words by clicking on add word over here on the right. And then we type over here, I will put maybe protest. I'll add a couple of words. So let's do another one. Sometimes I saw that they do get eliminated. So let's do it again. Protest. Switch. Yeah, that's a little better. And then we will maybe put Ottawa. And maybe we'll do one more. Let's put Trudeau. because these are all words that through our previous analysis we know are occurring quite frequently within our data set. And this contextualizer will give us a sense of what words happen before and after. And so you can change the amount of words you want to get a sense of before and after. So I'm going to do 2 for both before and after, so left and right. And then I will run the contextualizer. And you can essentially see here at all the different words that Convoy has before and after. So the 2 words it has before and after. And you can essentially see from these results where some of these observations are more common than others. And so this combination of citizens of Ottawa and having the "you're told" has occurred 3 times. So if we were to save these results into a separate file, we could do some more sorting here, and we can get a sense of there may be some pairs preceding and after words that are occurring more often. And that can give you a little bit more context into how people are using some of these common words, which can be very useful for linguistic analysis. The last thing I wanted to take a look at was this case study menu option. And it's essentially a way to kind of quickly do some of the LIWC functionality all in one space on an individual piece of text. I like using it specifically for color coding. So what you have to do is take in some form of text. So I have a New York Times obituary here from 1887. I will copy it. I will put I will paste it into this little data set tab here. And then I will go over to color coding, and I will click on, well, you have to set a couple of categories first. And so this allows you to essentially color code your document based upon the different language features that are available within LIWC. So for example, we can put personal pronoun. You can do 5 as it says here. Maybe we will do some of the negative and positive ones, so the positive tone, and we'll go back down and do, you can probably search, negative tone, negative. And then maybe we will choose, well, we'll do adjectives maybe. So now we can essentially color code our results by clicking this color code here. And we can see the same document that we had before with the different words highlighted. And so if you want to get a better sense of, how LIWC defines its different features, this color coding is kind of nice. And so I guess it considers the tone of the word new to be positive, great. You can see here all of the green words are essentially the words that it within this document that it considers to be of a positive tone. You can have some pronouns here, which is in the blue. You can see all the adjectives as well. So it's a nice way to kind of visually look at your documents and get a better sense of how LIWC is classifying the different words that occur within it. So that's LIWC, the 2022 version of it. It's a very useful tool to do, commonly used tool to do textual analysis on long forms of text. And again, you can see that if you were, from this example of using LIWC, if you were trying to do this form of analysis manually on a large data set, it would be very challenging, where it is nice to have a tool like LIWC to do dictionary-based analysis of your textual documents. And so you can highlight certain things over others in a way that might not be as possible if you were using manual coding methods alone. And for far more details on the software, please visit the LIWC website, which will be shared on our course page.